let's start this on a positive note and it'll all be downhill from there. So I want to talk to you guys about what has to be one of my top 10 reads of the year so far. I just finished it recently. It's called Asunder by Kerstin and it was amazing. So if you haven't heard about this book, I'm going to give you a quick synopsis. We follow a young woman named Karis Eska, and I think she's around 29 years old in this world. And she is what in this world is called a death speaker. So when she was young, she made a pact with this demon eldritch horror creature thing, which essentially serves as one of the many gods in this world, called Sebaster. And through that pact, she was given the powers of a death speaker, which lets her talk to someone for a short period of time after they've died. In return, her life is basically forfeit to Sebaster. So at some point, at some point he can just call her and kill her at any point. Like essentially that's how it works. And now because she's a death speaker, that's her job. So she goes around to places where people died, and she's able to talk to their souls from beyond the veneer, as it were, and find out what happened. And she gets paid to do that. And then very, very early on, like right from page one, she's basically in the middle of a job. You just get thrown into this. She's in the middle of a job, and some crazy, crazy things happen. She gets in deep trouble, and long story short, she ends up getting someone shadow bound to her. So this other person becomes bound to her shadow, and she's stuck with that other person. And this was all, a decision that she made, and she went into that. And the story essentially goes from there. So it's this slow unraveling where, Kerstin Hall, she very much doesn't describe the world to you. You're just kind of thrown in, and it's a sink or swim situation, which I thought was brilliantly done. The world building is very dark. It's a dark world. It's kind of heavy sometimes. It doesn't feel like a particularly happy place. And you have demons, you have eldritch horror creations, you have some crazy baboons. I don't know why the baboons come to mind, but it's just the world building was so fascinating, and I was surprised with how much emphasis was placed on it. And at the same time, it's just this beautifully told story where you unravel the plot while you're learning the background of not just Karis, but the other characters that come into play, because there is a found family and there are some really endearing characters in that found family. So you learn more about them, and especially about Karis and like why she made the decisions she made, and then how all of the consequences of those decisions leading up to this point, while at the same time the plot is just continuously moving and things are just getting worse and worse in many ways. I thought that the prose in this book was wonderful. There were some beautiful descriptions, and I just found the storytelling to be so efficient. Like Kerstin Hall just does such a great job of, in any given scene, you're not just doing one thing, right? You're not just developing the characters, you're progressing the plot as well. You're giving the backstory, you're just building up the world, and it was just brilliant. I found Karis herself is got to be one of my favorite female characters that I've read. She's this really broken person who's got her walls up, and she's had such a tough life, but at the same time she's got a big heart under that rough exterior. And in seeing her change and seeing her relationships develop with those other characters was probably the highlight of the story. I mean, there is a slow burn romance in this, and it was, like even if you don't love romance in your novels, I think this one was just so exceptionally done. And by the end of it, I was like, I was all for it. I was all for it. And I think at its heart, this is kind of a love story, but I think that there's just so much more to it, and it's kind of a very difficult book to talk about because, I think this is one of those where the experience was just so amazing going into it blind, and I really hope that you give that a shot and you go into this blind. And I have to say, like, Kerstin Hall, I am an absolute admirer. Like, what an amazing author, and I want to check out all of her other stuff. And this is, I think technically this is marketed as a standalone, but I've heard that it's actually part one of a series, and the way it does end on a bit of a cliffhanger. So I'm hoping that book two comes, and I want to get the word out so that we can make sure that book two is published. And yeah, so that was Asunder. I highly, highly recommend it, guys. I would be very shocked if it doesn't make it into the top 10. Another book I finished is called Spark of the Divine. This is indie fantasy, and essentially it's a D&D style story. It's told in a very modern voice, and we follow a mercenary group who, in this world, they're kind of just doing a job, and they get tangled up into something much bigger. Specifically, that there are some evil people who are stealing the power of the gods, and these mercenaries, because of some connections within their own group and some other things that happen, they get tied up into stopping that plot. This story is very much about the Motley Crew. This is about the relationships between these characters, and I think there's 5 or 6 of them, and it's this really fast moving plot. It's a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun reading this. You know, like the plot doesn't stop, but at the same time, we have all these moments where we're just developing the relationships between this Motley Crew, and they're all very distinct personalities, which is kind of the fun of it. There's a little bit of romance in there. There's a little bit of, like tensions and a lot of fun, and just it was a good time. The plot itself, like I said, it's fast moving. It never felt like it stalled. There was no point where I was bored reading this book. I just kind of flew by it. It was just a really easy read. So I definitely recommend it if you're looking for something like that. If you're looking for a fun fantasy, classic but also modern romp, I think this is a great bet. If you're looking for like a great Motley Crew, you're looking for something that's character focused, but at the same time it's got like a fast pace to it, I definitely recommend this one. I think I had some small qualms with the writing style. I think they were, like some of it could have been a little bit tighter. There weren't any typos. It was really well edited. I think it was just, for me personally, I have to be careful saying this. Like, I don't think this will affect your enjoyment. It was just for me personally, sometimes it felt like, there were some sentences were unnecessary, or we're just repeating things, or, like sometimes the dialogue was too disjointed, and there were a few small things like that, which kind of detracted a little bit. But I will say, again, I had a lot of fun reading this. And if you're in that mood for like a fun fantasy romp, I definitely recommend Spark of the Divine. Definitely check it out. And yeah, I'm excited to continue in the series whenever the next book is published. So then after finishing Asunder and Spark of the Divine, I started, because it was October time, so I wanted to think about trying to do something atmospheric and seasonal. So I wanted to do some horror stories, but I haven't read much horror, to be honest. It's never really been my genre. So for whatever reason, I decided I would start with Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. And I think this is kind of like a medieval horror fantasy. I don't really know how you would define this book. I got to about 50% through this book, and then I decided to put it down. I think this is essentially, we're talking about medieval France. This is 1300s. We're talking about the Black Death, and this is maybe one of the darkest books I've read personally. It just, the atmosphere of it, and just the scenery as it's described, and just the bodies everywhere, and it was just so stifling, to tell you the truth. I mean, it was so well written. Like Christopher Buehlman, I read The Black Tongue Thief and I loved it, and that book had so much wit and humor in it, and such a strong sense of character voice. And this book is very different from that. But at the same time, Christopher Buehlman tries on occasion to put some of that humor in here. But to be honest, for me, because the world was just so dark, it just felt a bit jarring, And I think this is one of those things where a world like this, if it was a secondary world, it wouldn't be quite so bad. But this is the real world. Like, this kind of stuff happened. And this was France in the 1300s, and he just kind of throws you in there. And it was really hard to read for me. It just felt stifling. And there was a point around 40-ish%. So I will say one other thing about this book. It's very fever dreamy. I feel like all of the horror sequences in it just feel like strange fever dreams, which I don't know if I gelled with that, to be honest. I don't know. I didn't enjoy it. The characters were very compelling at first, but then over time I just realized I don't know if I cared that much about them. Around the 43-ish% mark in this book, something happened where I thought that something really bad was about to happen, and this involved a little girl and our main POV character, who is much older than said little girl. And I just felt this sense of dread, like, oh God, is he actually going to go there? Is he actually going to do this on page? And thankfully it didn't happen, right? Like, thankfully it didn't happen. But I felt so sick in that moment, feeling like I was about to read that after that point, I lost all enjoyment for the book. Like, I just didn't want to continue. And I feel bad because it's really well written. Like, Christopher Buehlman is a hell of an author, no doubt about that. I just don't think I can continue this one. I may at some point come back to it, I'm not sure. We'll see. Like, if you guys think I really should for the second half, I got halfway through it, so it feels kind of bad to put it down. But yeah, I'm just not feeling it. I was just not feeling it. So anyway, continuing with the horror theme, I also started Blackwater, and this one was so good. I mean, I'm only about 6-7% in, but it's such a compelling start. I'm absolutely loving it. Just getting introduced to the small town of Perdido, Alabama, and learning about all the people there and getting the small town vibes back in the 1920, I think, is when the story takes place, or at least as part of the story. And there's some creepy stuff going on, but it's not the focus of it. So I'm super curious about what's going to happen. I'm loving Blackwater. I think this is gonna be a great read. So then continuing with what I'm going to read in October. So I planned to read with my friend Ben from Genghis Khan, Pet Sematary by Stephen King. I think this will be, I don't think it's my first Stephen King book, but I haven't read any of his books for so long that I don't even remember what I've read by him. So it's basically my first book by him. And I don't think, I've heard it's not the scariest book he's written or anything, but this is the one that we were both pretty interested in reading for October. So we're going to give that a shot. I hope it goes well, and we'll see from there. Yeah, I hope you guys have had some great reads coming up, and I hope that your spooky season is full of awesome 5 stars. Have a good day.